The full Play It Today breakdown is linked in the description on theircheck.com for Chiller, that matters. Because the big question is not whether this arcade game is infamous, it is whether that infamy is enough reason to actually play it today. For most players, the answer is no. For a very specific kind of arcade history enthusiast, maybe. Chiller is one of those retro games where reputation does most of the work. It is remembered because it was extreme, uncomfortable, and built around horror shock value in an arcade-like gun format. That makes it historically interesting. It does not automatically make it a good modern recommendation. The reason to play Chiller today is narrow but real. If you care about controversial arcade history, early horror games, or the edges of what arcade operators were willing to put on the floor in the mid-80s, Chiller is worth knowing about. It shows a very specific design mindset. Short, blunt, mechanical, and built around the act of shooting targets under pressure. But if you are just looking for a good retro light gun game to start with, this is not the one I would hand you first. The barriers stack up quickly. Legal access is awkward. The best historical version is the arcade original, which is not an easy modern play option for normal people. The content is abrasive by design, and the gameplay value is wrapped tightly around its notoriety. Once the shock context is removed, what remains is a very specialist object. So the recommendation is selective. Chiller is historically important, but not broadly recommended. It is a game to understand. Maybe sample legally if you have the opportunity, not a game most players need to chase down. Now, how do you play it legally today? The clean answer is, there is no good legal mainstream option clearly available, no clearly verified official modern digital release, subscription version, remake, remaster, or current arcade compilation was found for Chiller. That means the meaningful legal route is original era access. For purists, the reference version is the 1986 Exidy arcade game. That is the version that defines Chiller's reputation, and it is the version that matters if your interest is historical fidelity. There is also a 1990 NS version, and Chiller also appeared in the Maxi 15 NS compilation, but those do not solve the modern access problem. They are part of the version history, not a clean recommendation for most players today. So what should you buy? For most viewers, probably nothing. If you already have legal access to the arcade game, or you are a specialist with a serious reason to seek out the NES version, that is different. But if you are asking for the easiest legitimate way to play Chiller now, there is no distinct low friction route to recommend. That is why the arcade original remains the version to start with, at least in principle. Not because it is convenient. It is not. Not because it softens the rough edges. It does not. But because Chiller's value is tied to what it was in arcades, a light gun horror game built around a very specific, very uncomfortable kind of target shooting. If you strip away the arcade context too much, you are no longer really getting the reason people still talk about it. The NES version may matter to collectors or NES light gun specialists, but it is not the best general answer. It is a secondary home version of a game whose reputation belongs to the arcade cabinet. Before starting, the main thing to understand is setup and context. This is not a game where the biggest first-time problem is a route, a build, or a beginner strategy. The problem is access, hardware, and expectation. Chiller is a light gun shooter, so the more faithful the setup, the less convenient it is likely to be. And because there is no clean modern official release to point to, you should be cautious about assuming there is a simple legal download waiting somewhere. Also, be clear about the content. Chiller's graphic torture imagery is not a side detail. It is central to why the game is remembered, and it directly affects whether you should start it at all. If that premise sounds more unpleasant than interesting, trust that reaction. You are not missing a universally essential play experience. If you do play it, treat it as a short, sharp piece of arcade history. Learn what it was doing. Notice why it stood out. Then decide whether you need more than that. Chiller is not a hidden recommendation waiting to be rescued. It is a notorious artifact with poor modern access and a very narrow audience. If that is exactly what you are looking for, start with the arcade original if you can access it legally. If not, there are better places to spend your retro light gun time.